All right, so it's now broadcasting to all of the attendees, of which there are currently 0.
Nice.
That's kind of, how it goes, I guess. Oh, wait, I can put this over here. Neat.
I like how we're figuring this out while hosting.
I mean, that was basically me with, I remember it was one of the classes where I had to do like a presentation and I had to I forgot how you use the drawing feature in Zoom and stuff.
Yeah.
I was
I
like,
don't play with the whiteboard too much.
I was like, oh, that's how this works. Oh, we have an attendee. Neat.
Hi.
Welcome. We'll be starting at about 6:02 probably. The check-in code's already up there, but we will put it up on the next slide at 6 o'clock for people that are interested in collecting those sweet, sweet ACM points for the store that we haven't finished.
In progress.
There's a joke there, because it's actually me who's supposed to be finishing it. Well, and the rest, and the developers to implement it, but yeah. All right. We're at 6 o'clock, so let's go over to the check-in, where people can put in the check-in code if they so wish. I think this has got to be one of the weirder check-in codes.
It's pretty cute, though. I like it. I don't know who came up with this.
Somebody in marketing, probably, or external. I forgot. But it's neat. Ooh. Here we go. Oh, look.
Hey, hello, everyone.
Yes, hello. It's now the size of a Cogs 102C group project in here.
Why?
Too soon? Okay. For those of you who haven't taken Cogs 102C, you'll find out. Alrighty, so we'll be starting, as I said a couple of minutes ago, we'll be starting at about 6:03, just to kind of allow a little bit of time, and we've switched over to the check-in code, and if you don't know where to put that in, the link is, or part of the link is there, and then you'll put it in on the ACM portal. So, okie doke.
If you guys want, you can maybe say in the chat, like, hi, and a fun fact about yourself or why you're excited to be here to get things going.
We've left the chat open. Yeah, you should be able to say stuff between each other. And then we've also got the Q&A for the end of the event. Okay, so we're coming up on starting. Yeah, cool. So this won't be too long of a seminar, or whatever this really ends up being, but we're calling it a seminar. Yeah, so it'll last probably about 30 minutes for the bulk of it. And then we're gonna have a Q&A session. And then at the end, if there's any other time left, then probably just open up if anyone else wants to talk about anything else, or more specific questions about this actual seminar. So, are you ready? Cool. So we'll start off with who we are and a little bit about our background and kind of why we're talking about this today. So Natalie, go first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Duprey. I'm a recent UCSD alumni. I graduated last quarter. And me and Sam have been partners for about 3 to 5 projects. I'm not too sure. But basically, I am a UX researcher. So I majored in cognitive science with a focus in design. And I'm here to explain the human-centered design process for you guys today. Sam.
Oh, my network went. This was a very bad time for that to go. But anyway, long story. Yeah, so I'm Sam. I'm a third-year cognitive science student. with a minor in computer science, and my primary background is in human-computer interaction research as well as UX research. And I've worked at the UCSD Design Lab. I'm obviously here design lead for ACM development in ACM UCSD, and then I've also done work at DFA and AdWave and other student orgs here on campus. So that's me, and sorry for cutting out for a minute. So we're going to be moving on to the agenda for today. So in this presentation, we're going to be covering an intro to what human-centered design is, why it is relevant perhaps to you as a computer science student, if that's or computing student, to keep it in relevance to ACM, a real-world application in the context of a whiteboarding exercise, and what you can do to get involved at UCSD and beyond in industry. And then finally, as I said before, we're going to leave any remaining time after the talk as an open Q&A to the both of us, followed by, again, any extra remaining time after that for specific questions about this talk. So, go. So the now former Design Lab director, Don Norman, he describes human-centered design as an approach that puts human needs, capabilities, and behavior first, and then designs to accommodate those needs, capabilities, and ways of behaving. So in short, we're designing to solve the problems of stakeholders and addressing their needs. So a significant component of human-centered design is the research phase, and we use this research to best understand the context of our stakeholders. And this is a kind of an area that becomes especially important because when you're doing design, you may be working in disciplines that are outside of your technical knowledge, which is why what we call the contextual inquiry part of human-centered design is so important, because you really have to understand the context of the people that you're designing for and their needs and their problems to actually design something that is relevant to them. And you see a lot of cases where things get designed that are designed for the designer. You're designing a solution to a problem for the designer, not for a particular technical team. Like, for example, you might have a group of architects or legal analysts or something like that. I've actually done a little bit of work with people who were legal consultants a couple of years ago. And that was a very interesting challenge. So these are 6 steps of design as outlined by IDEO. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at human-centered design. So typically a lot of people would break it down into 3 steps. So you have your kind of your exploration and your contextual inquiry, developing a solution, and then finally from there you do prototyping and implementation. But we are going to focus on the 6 steps that were developed by IDEO as a part of their human-centered design field guide, and is also available on their website as kind of a list of how they do design. So we begin with observations. The key takeaway from this stage is to leverage contextual inquiry to find and understand the stakeholders that you'll be designing for. So you might observe the life of the user, or for example, seeing how they go about performing a particular task using current solutions. So that would be kind of like a competitor analysis, but for observation. Or you might use semi-formal interviews. This is something that I use a lot in my work. Or you use something like diary studies. I'm not going to cover these solutions particularly in depth, because as you take design classes, they tend to cover these in quite a lot of significant detail. And my recommendations for 2 particular classes for that is cognitive design with Taylor Jackson Scott, as well as interaction design with Scott Clemmer. Those 2 classes cover this kind of stuff in a fair amount of detail, especially diary studies and kind of more experimental procedures in the interaction design class. So from here, the important step is to consolidate the data that you garnered from your contextual inquiry and your work of your team, if applicable, to determine what the key problem points and needs were in your data. And this will be the basis for determining your problem area that you will then use to brainstorm potential solutions. So this is effectively the intersection between observations and then ideation. So then from your ideation, so you would have perhaps a singular solution area, or maybe you have a couple of different solutions that you would have developed. And this is generally the case, is you might have a couple. And this will then lead into what we call rapid iteration or rapid prototyping, wireframing and sketching. And as perhaps you might think, it involves sketching, wireframing, and prototyping, generally in that order. So the goal here is to produce tangible artifacts that can convey the solution or a list of solutions that you want to work towards. So by tangible artifacts, we just mean something physical that you can present and give to your stakeholders. And if not stakeholders, it might be something that you convey to other teams that are outside of design. So this is not just for user feedback, but also for giving to basically understanding progress. Like, for example, if you might have a project manager for your team when you're working in the real world. So yeah, so from this point onwards, you should and this, I cannot stress this enough, you should be continuously working with your stakeholder users to test your work. And if applicable, like for example, if you have users that carried over from your contextual inquiry, you would want to do follow-up interviews to refine your previous data based off of the solution area that you've determined. So it's really important that you end up into what you basically get into what is a cycle of iteration and user feedback. And you continue to funnel and refine your work in your solution area, addressing more and more nuanced issues in user testing. For example, at the beginning, user testing might address more significant global issues. So you might be addressing like significant layout issues, like in your initial prototypes or wireframes, or you may even be addressing problems in actually focusing your solution area. One such example is some teams go directly into iteration with their how might we statements. And if you don't know what those are, we'll be getting to that in a little bit. This is another concept from IDEO, but more linked to their alternate to human-centered design, which is called design thinking. And then towards the end, as you've done a lot more iteration and feedback, you'll be looking at more kind of nitty-gritty things. So you'll be looking at typically more graphical items, such button sizes, colors, and things like that. And a lot of classes, and I see this come up a lot, where they stress the importance of the research and they say, don't focus on the graphics. And this is a very valid point to make. You don't want to focus on graphics because if you do that, then you're going to guide the user away from what you actually want to test. But it's still important to remember that as you get into the later parts of your design process and also in general, the graphics can play a very large role in what we call motion, important in providing the tone of your interface and also the user stimulation to the user. And stimulation is a big part of what drives usage. So one such example of that that comes up a lot with Don Norman is gamification of particular tasks. So yeah, if you want to know more about this, they have a full explanation of user-centered design and human-centered design on their website. And if you want to learn more about their alternative to this and what they talk about now, which is design thinking, that is also available on the site. And specifically, if you want to have something tangible that you might want to like cross-reference when you're doing your work, and it's also using COGS 102C, is they have what's called the Field Guide to Human-Centered Design. And that's where a lot of these things I just talked about were pulled from. I use this a lot when I structure my work as a PM, as a team lead or PM for a lot of projects that I work on, and it can be an invaluable resource. So yeah, if people originally there were going to be links to those, but they're pretty easy to find with a Google search. So
as members of ACM, you're probably wondering, why is any of this relevant? A lot of you are computer science majors, so you might not necessarily think about how design is relevant to you. But to start, it's really important because a lot of you are going to be a part of a dev team with whatever company you guys find jobs with. And when you're focusing on creating an app, it's really easy to lose sight of the lack of diversity and implicit biases that people have that go into making a product. I'm sure you can think of plenty of scandals or flops with a product where it misses the mark because of its user base. So one example that comes to mind is recently Google did a nice update to all of their apps in which they made all of them look like nice little red, yellow, green, and blue squares. But the problem is users can't really tell the difference between them. That being said, it's essential to remember that the user will say one thing and act completely different. So they might think it's really cool that you have the nice aesthetic all together where everything's the same color, but they're going to be really confused because everything looks like a square, so you're clicking on your email when you really want to open up the drive. So that's one example to consider why it's important to have a UX researcher in a design team. And you really have to consider this duality of the user saying one thing and acting completely different. Finally, human-centered design is important because it allows you to understand where your coworkers are coming from. So that being said, if you're on a dev team, there's a really big chance that you're going to have a design team as well. So if you understand why the designers are choosing to make certain choices, it'll help you resolve conflicts and make better prototypes. So it's really important that everyone's on the same team and understanding why we make specific features. So speaking of the real world, let's go ahead and do a real world application. So we didn't spend too long covering what human-centered design actually is, and it's important because we need to show an example. So specifically, we're going to address something called a whiteboard challenge, which many of you either have seen or will see during the interview process for getting a job. That being said, what is a whiteboard challenge? Great question. So it's basically...
So,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No. I was going to say, why should you go first? I'll let you go.
I was just going to read the slide. I was going to say, it's basically a whiteboard challenge is a 30 to 60-minute design challenge that interviewers will use to evaluate your design process. So they just want to understand like how you think as a designer, so that way they understand whether or not you're going to fit well enough into their team. Take it away.
Yeah, so, when I've done a couple of these myself now. And the important thing to know is that basically the reason why they have you do these is that it shows your approach to problem solving, much like coding challenges that you might get when you're doing technical interviews for programming positions. And it also shows your experience with the design processes and how you actually approach the problem, the structure that you use. So we just talked about the fact that we didn't cover human-centered design for that long in a human-centered design seminar. Well, that's because really the bulk of human-centered design or anything like this, user-centered design, community-centered design, design thinking, is these are all frameworks that are leveraged as tools to perform design. And the most important part is what we're kind of showing now is, how do you walk through this and get from a problem to a solution, and then how do you get from a solution to something that's actually useful? So yeah, we will now go through.
So this is the prompt that we're going to be working with today. So during the pandemic, Spin has seen a decrease in the number of users leveraging its bike and scooter sharing app. They're looking for a way to rebrand and attract commuters during and after the pandemic. During this challenge, you'd probably have about like 30 to 60 minutes, but we're going to go through it a little quicker.
Yeah, so for the sake of time and kind of chunking it out, we wanted to frame it around human-centered design as we spoke about before. So we're going to address it from these 4 perspectives. We're going to start with understanding the problem, and this is effectively getting the context and understanding your stakeholders. And then from that data, data in significant air quotes, given the time limitations, you would define a problem space. And then from that, you will ideate, which in this case, we're to constrain that with how might we statements. And then you would use that to define a singular solution that you would then do sketches or storyboards. You're never going to get to like a prototype during this time period. And the reason why it's called a whiteboard challenge is because it is all about how you can convey information in a short period of time in a structured manner. And then finally, we have self-reflection. And this isn't really a part of a whiteboard challenge. It's more just important that these things will never go, they'll never go perfectly. And you have to be able to learn from your mistakes, both as you're working and afterwards. Yeah, so I've already talked about this a little bit, that you don't necessarily have the time to do research and to really understand the context of any particular users, because you're obviously not able to do interviews and things like that because you're in a room with an interviewer or perhaps you're on Zoom. So what you can do is that you can consider the problem space that you've been given, or the prompt, I should say, and define that into a problem space that you can ideate from. So as you see on the slide, you say, well, you summarize the problem. So some example how might we statements that you might use both here and in ideation is, how might we redesign and rebrand spin bikes to be more sanitary to encourage more usage? Or how might we create a system that is affordable and enticing for college students to use spin bikes? So alternatively, or in addition to, you can also get more context from the interviewer. And I think this is something that people can forget about. So you might be able to ask them, are there any particular constraints? And there's a couple of those listed there. So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to break down the problem into stakeholder needs and stakeholder problems, and understanding who that stakeholder is. So in this case, we're primarily addressing a business problem, and we know what the business problem is because it's addressed in this problem statement. But we have to consider user needs and user problems as well. So if we know what the business problem is, who are the users and what are their problems? Well, maybe a user needs to get from A to B in an efficient manner. So in that case, transportation should be reliable, the bike should be in suitable condition, and the app would need to minimize breakdowns in the interface. And what do we mean by breakdowns? Well, that would be something in relation to something like design heuristics, or Nielsen's design heuristics. And if you don't know what they are, that's something that you can ask about in the Q&A. Or maybe the user wants to find a way to try and stay fit. So instead of using spin bikes to transportation, so they don't have any particular place to go in any constrained time, maybe they're just purely using it for fitness. Well, they would have different needs and different problems to somebody who's trying to use it as straight transportation. So you're probably thinking, well, how does this translate into a problem area, and how does this translate into ideation? Well, I'm going to put that on you, and I'm going to say to try and brainstorm a few of these things in your head while we walk through the next step.
So we're going to brainstorm together. We're basically going to take about like 3 to 5-ish minutes. And if you have an idea of how we might address the problem, you can send it either in the chat. I'm not sure if there's a raise your hand feature, but if there is, feel free to do that as well. And yeah, I'm just going to give you guys a few minutes.
And if people want to see the problem statement again, we can go back to that slide if they need.
Oh yeah, that might be a good idea. Keep in mind when it comes to ideas, it's okay if there's no like fully formed ideas. It could be just like a random thought or color too. We can build on that. But if not, we have a couple of prompts too to help.
Yeah, really, we're just trying to get people to kind of think about it in the way that you might would in a real life situation. But yeah, we have a few examples to kind of walk through some of the things you might come up with that are related to the two how might we's that we listed before.
All right, I think I'm just going to go through the examples we have then.
Yes.
So yeah, a couple that I came up with were, one, we can start by maybe doing a marketing campaign to advertise a new cleaning station. That's a potential idea since things are very post-pandemic world with spin. That might be an issue. Another one might be to make it like a cute date idea or like some kind of fraternity or club bonding experience where we can do something special for that. And of course, discounts. College students love free things. So those are a couple of random ideas that you'd write down on the whiteboard, and then you'd hone in on one idea specifically that you specifically like. So in this case, I chose to go with the cleaning station one. So if we can go to the next slide. All right, so then this is the part where you start storyboarding and or making wireframes. So your storyboard is just going to be a short little comic or drawing that will explain the current problem and the proposed solution. Your storyboard is going to feature something called a persona as well. The persona is going to be all the details that you gathered about the user base, but you're going to assign it a name. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that I made a delightful little persona here. This is Miss Ashley Tisdale. She's 20 years old and she has a job in Price Center and she lives in the village. So she needs a spin bike to get to and from work. But the main issue is that she feels that they might be unsanitary. So, and then on the right, you can see a short little comic explaining that Ashley has the Spin app. She gets a notification and she now sees that the bikes have been cleaned and she can get to work on time. So it has to be stick figures because of course you don't have time. No one's expecting you to make like a Picasso or whatever. It doesn't need to be perfect. As long as you can show there's like intent behind what you're showing in the comic. Like there's a specific user, there's a specific need that they have, and it's being met with the design idea you have. So that's all that they need to see during the storyboarding and wireframing time. So for a wireframe, you'd probably want to do it a little bit bigger. I probably should make that a little bit clearer, but that's okay. But basically, you'd want to show your device, in this case, a cell phone, and you'd want to do like simple boxes and then like arrows showing what each feature represents. It doesn't need to be like all color coded and whatnot in an actual app. So yeah, that's what you have for there. And then the final, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing to this, that the important thing, like when you're doing the storyboard and the wireframe, you try to constrain it around a particular task. So Natalie already kind of constrained this as well. But like think of it as like a great example that is used in a couple of the design classes is making a calendar invite or making a calendar event. So that's kind of an example of a task that you might use. So but when you create your solution in your solution kind of area, the important thing is, like, this is less so for whiteboarding, but more in general, is that you'll be developing what we call user flows from that solution area. And each of those is kind of like an individual task, or they might make up the overall task that resolves a particular problem or need of the stakeholder.
Yeah, and building off of that, the final thing you're going to want to do with the whiteboard challenge is a small self-reflection. So you're going to want to start by explaining to the interviewer the pros and cons of your idea. You need to explain how it addresses a problem, and there's some things that you need to work on. And of course, you have to say what you would do if you had more time. They don't expect you to finish and have a fully developed solution. That's just ridiculous. So what you need to do is explain what you need to do to actually get this idea going. So you need to explain, of course, one, you need a full research team going. You need someone to make sure that you understand what the user actually needs and what is expected of the current people that use your resource. Are they using it because they need to get to and from work? Are they using it for the exercise purpose? And you need to understand like the full background of the user. That's something that you can't do within this kind of challenge. It's also important to understand that you are going to not address the entire problem. So what you should do is say, maybe I focus too much on creating a new idea rather than fixing a problem within the system already, or I didn't consider the business constraint side of things. So you also want to let them know if there's any unsolved parts of the problem space based on how you're defining the problem. So you're given the prompt, but you are the one who ultimately defines what that means. So it's important to explain like different aspects of that problem space. And yeah, that's how you go through a whiteboard challenge. And today we're also going to mention a couple of careers and opportunities that are at UCSD, if any of this interested you today. So to start, there's what I do. And that would be user experience research, shortened by UX research. And basically, you're going to do the qualitative analysis of users. That means you're going to develop and test prototypes, and you're going to be interviewing users to understand their needs going to be sending out surveys, and you'll be testing it with them as well to help observe how they interact with the product as well. And you're going to take all of that and create research reports to send to your dev and UX designers to let them know this is how the user interacts with what we already have, and here's how we can improve it. So yeah, it also is considered market research, but they lean more towards the research aspect of things. And some places where you would find a UX researcher would be, of course, the design lab. So a lot of it is academic research that is done there, and they create papers that get published and whatnot. And you can find it also in a company settings too. Places like Tesla will hire UX researchers under a different title called a UX engineer. And again, they're more market focused. So they want to see how can we make the product better so that way we can get more people to buy cool cars. And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about HCI researcher in a second. But in general, with a lot of these positions, they use a lot of the terms interchangeably, like user experience or human-computer interaction or user interaction. But there's often a lot of overlap. But the only general thing that I've noticed over a long time of looking at jobs and positions and also talking to recruiters is that when they say engineer, they're generally expecting more technical background knowledge. So when they say, like, for example, user experience engineer, they might be asking for like front-end development knowledge. So they might be asking like HTML, CSS, PHP, JS, those kind of things. And I've even seen cases where they've wanted, like, for user interaction designers, for like product design, for like physical product design, they've asked for things like Blender and like 3D modeling knowledge. So human-computer interaction researcher or HCI researcher. So these guys research, design, and build tools to inform the production of new technologies. And this area is almost entirely research focused. So some great examples are Microsoft Research and the Design Lab, and they're actually both interrelated. We have faculty that work here that have done work with Microsoft Research, and we'll be mentioning a little bit about them later on.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. But up next, we have user interaction designers or UI designers. And they're what you would originally consider a graphic designer, but they're like the newer version of that. So they're going to use human-centered design to create those new visuals for any app or digital product you can think of. So think the animations, logos, the graphics, all that fun stuff is what the UI designer will focus. They're a much more technical background, so they're going to be the people who are incredible when it comes to things like Procreate or Illustrator, those sort of things. They're a lot less research focused and a lot more technical. So keep that in mind if that's something you're interested in. And of course, any tech startup or any kind of app or digital product will have a team of UI designers. It's just essential. So yeah.
Yeah, and finally, I'm getting into one of the more niche titles, and the reason why I bring this one up is because it's a perfect example of how businesses use terms like user experience, user interaction in completely different ways. So this is a human factors engineer. So often at other businesses outside of Sony, and this is a title used at Sony, they would be called a product designer. And these are people that are involved in the whole design process for both new and existing solutions. And by that, I mean new products as well as refining existing products. So an example at Sony is they do audio. So they'd be doing a lot of user testing of their existing audio products to refine and adapt them for new audio products. And that would be both hardware and software. So they share many aspects with both UX researchers and UI designers, but they tend to work more closely with engineers that are actually producing the hardware and the software solutions. So a great example, as I just said, is Sony, but a lot of companies have product designers as well, or product engineers. And when they say product engineer, like I think Apple has a position as product engineer, they typically ask for real engineering background. So yeah, those are a couple of interesting examples. There's a huge variety of positions in the space of design. And I think it's one of the most impressive parts of design is remembering that it's a field that spans so many different disciplines. I, for example, have done work in medical research that is still related to design.
Sam, I think you cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. I don't actually know where I cut out, but
probably that last sentence.
It's fine. It's just yeah. I've done work in things that are way left field in design, basically.
It's cool. And yeah, so of course, you as undergrads can get involved too, just like us. And when I was a student there, I was working with Professor Stephen Dow in the Proto Lab. He teaches classes like Design 100, Design 10, and I think he sometimes has a COGS 160 class about civic research. So you might know him from one of those courses. But yeah, he does a lot of academic research in the Proto Lab, and it's all about social computing in regards to digital tool development. So it's basically seeing how people interact with web tools and see how we can form distributed cognition through them. And another important thing that he does that I worked on was the competition called D4SD, Design for San Diego. And it's basically a design challenge that's really cool because it uses crowdsourcing to solve local problems. So basically that means people of all backgrounds, regardless of whether they do design or computer science, are allowed to come together if they have an idea and they'll build on that. So the research I did is I helped create a tool for beginners who don't have a design background to understand how to start thinking about design questions and how to create those how might we statements and connect with the people that they need to create a full idea. So yeah, if you are interested in anything like that, you can check out the Protolabs website here.
Yeah. So another interesting faculty member we have is a more recent faculty member coming from the University of Toronto, is Haijun Jia. He has done work with Microsoft Research and is exploring the future of productivity tools. So he has since gone on to start the Creativity Lab, which will be operating out of the Design and Innovation Building, hopefully, when that is eventually completed. So this will be a great resource for those of you that are interested in human-computer interaction or may have a computer science background and want to work on some emerging technologies like mixed reality, computational linguistics he's done a little bit with, process, so NLP, natural language processing, and a whole bunch of other areas. So he, in his research for Microsoft, he's done a lot of work with their productivity tools in relation to the Surface. And he taught a great class called a variant of Design 160, which I believe will be running again as a full class, which explores a lot of this, including pen plus touch interactions and a lot of other multimodal interaction stuff. So it's a very different approach to doing design, but it's still design.
Next, we have Scott Clemmer. He is extremely important because he helped co-found the Design Lab in 2014, I believe. And he has a very strong education background. He teaches a bunch of classes within the COGS 120 series. I think it's 120 and 121. Don't quote me on that, but he does a lot of HCI-based courses here at UCSD. And he also has a really strong mentoring background as well. So a lot of his students who he talks to and helps with their portfolios go on to do incredible things like find small companies like Instagram and Pros. You might have heard of them. So if you have a chance, I definitely would recommend doing Coffee with a Prof with Professor Clemmer if you want feedback on your portfolio or to meet new people.
And for those of you interested in his lab work, he does have a form on his website that's fairly well hidden for RA positions. It's quite a lengthy application. Finally, we have Colleen Emenegger. This is my research position in the design lab in what I'm going to shorten to the automation lab, but we do a lot more things than that. And this lab does a lot of things, but we predominantly focus around automation and the future of mobility and autonomous vehicles. So the two research projects, one of which I'm working directly on, one of which I'm kind of working on, will hopefully be working on fully in the future, is Unbiased and the Ford contract. So Unbiased is a project in healthcare exploring the hidden and implicit biases within patient-physician interactions. So you're probably wondering how that's related to design. This is a perfect example that very left field and very far afield things can still be design problems that we have to design solutions to. So in this case, we're designing a solution to implicit bias that is given off by physicians in patient-physician interactions in hospitals. So we're currently partnered with University of Washington, but we've also been exploring things with the Veterans Affairs and things like that. And then the second is the Ford contract. So this is closer to something that you might expect, at least in relation to the other work the design lab is doing. So here we're exploring the role of humans in an automated driving system as co-pilots in a semi-autonomous vehicle. So by that we mean it's the kind of the procedure of handoff between real people and an autonomous driving system, and how we can kind of go back and forth between the two. So yeah, those are two very different areas of work, but they're both still design problems and design solutions. But they also require very different technical backgrounds. So somebody who, for example, is a biology major could take part in working in Unbiased because of their background and still do design work that they're interested in. While somebody with, let's say, a machine learning background or natural language processing background might be interested in the Ford contract. And a lot of the work that we're doing is natural language processing and communication plays a huge role in the interaction between humans and automated driving systems. So yeah. So yeah, now we're moving into, we've run out of slides. So we're moving into an open Q&A. So this is where people can just ask any questions that they have about what we just talked about the labs, about human-centered design, or even community-centered design, design thinking, or crowdsourcing and things like that. And I'm actually going to move away from this slide because for the people that haven't yet done the ACM on the ACM portal, this is the check-in code. You can put that in if you would like. And if there are no questions, we'll wrap up after about 5 to 10 minutes. This is a great question. Do you want to answer this one first or me?
Say you go for it.
Okay. Okay, so really, I'm going to speak to this generally. So like a generic position, let's say user experience or user interaction. So for those kind of internship positions, like let's say, for example, let's say ServiceNow or Adobe, you're looking very much, the first thing you want is you want to go beyond class experience. So having some kind of real life experience under your belt, even if it's for an organization, can be invaluable when you're doing your interviews and when they're looking at your resume. But beyond that, probably the most important thing is having a portfolio and justifying your decisions. So what do I mean by justifying your decisions? I mean twofold. First, I mean that let's say you write up a case study on your portfolio where you're writing up a project that you did in, say, COGS 120 or Design 100 or COGS 102C, you'll want to justify why you made design decisions and why you used the research that you did in the way that you did in that case study. And you want to be able to defend those decisions when they ask them about them in the interview. Because if you do get to an interview portion, that is something that they will expect of you. And I know a lot of people, and I've been in this position myself, who have lost positions because they weren't able to defend their decisions. So that is vital, as well as, of course, if they ask you to do a whiteboard challenge, to be able to think on your feet and communicate effectively and cogently. Beyond that, there's a degree of luck involved, and you want to try and apply to positions that play to your strengths. So some companies might want more of a graphic background, like let's say that you know a lot about Illustrator and Photoshop and doing like graphic design, then you're going to want to lean towards UI positions or product positions that list that required qualifications. But even if it's not required and it's recommended, basically expect, like if it says a recommended position for something like Figma or Photoshop or any kind of design tool, they usually mean required. And they don't mean any tool in particular. They just want to know that you have experience using that kind of tool. So if they say Figma is a recommended tool, then, if you have experience using something like Framer or Sketch or Adobe XD, that doesn't necessarily matter. It's really about understanding how to use it and use it within the workflow. So yeah.
Pretty solid advice. One thing I'd say is also to remember when you're building your portfolio, it's cool to have a good range of different types of projects you work on too. So like Sam's saying, you should do classwork. You should also do something outside of school too. I know one thing that I did was the Disney Imagineering Challenge, which was really cool. You can go ahead and, I'm not sure if they're having it this year, but they might have it next year, where basically you can design a challenge for Disney. Another one is like, they have plenty of them out there, but basically you want to do something outside of school. You can also help out with like local small businesses to see like a case study there. That might be interesting. A lot of people in San Diego like when you reach out to them. So that's something you can also consider. On top of that, in terms of getting your portfolio started, you might want to use something like Behance or UX Folio are really good tools. If not, you can just build a website too. There's plenty of things like that. But yeah, I'd say those are pretty essential to getting an internship.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. But yeah, the portfolio is a really important part. And if you don't have a portfolio, you still need something to show, right? Because even if you, let's say you do an application, they don't have somewhere to give a website, or it's optional and you don't give one. If you get to the interview round, which you may do, because quite often, in my experience, more often than not, if it's optional, they don't bother looking at it. They will ask you about it in the interview. So if you didn't provide anything before, they will expect you to talk about and show stuff when you do. So yeah. And again, it all comes back to what we talked about before.
What Sam said, if you do end up having them expect you to show off your case studies in the interview, you're going to want to prep like presentation slides for it. So like you want to make a PowerPoint or a Google slide presentation to show each step of your design process. So just, keep in mind.
Yeah, and to an extent, this also applies to human-computer interaction related positions as well. And if you're applying for something research related, they're either going to ask for some kind of like final presentation, like if you take a class on human-computer interaction, you'll always be creating something like that. So you'll have something to pull from that. Or honestly, in a lot of cases, if you're doing work in something like the design lab or a similar lab for HCI, you're going to probably want to provide summaries and presentations of publications. So when you start getting into the more research end of this kind of stuff, that's when you have to start worrying about like, am I named on the publication in my lab? it feels like a petty thing to think about, but yeah, it's come up already. Ooh, the second challenge is a great question, but I'm going to let you go first, Natalie.
Yes, I got this one. So I'm not sure if you guys can see the questions, but this one says, once you get an interview, how do you prepare for design exercises, whiteboard challenges, etc.? So the best way to do that is practice makes perfect. So there's plenty of websites out there that I actually was just showing Sam the other day where you can get an automatically generated design challenge, and you should go ahead and try them out. I recommend doing it with a partner because you can get feedback from someone else on whether or not you're answering the question properly, and it helps a lot if it's not someone who has a background in design. That way you know how detailed you need to be with it. So yeah, you could easily go on one of them. I can try to find the website and share it in the chat here. But yeah, you're just going to want to keep practicing whiteboard challenges as much as you can if you have an interview coming up.
Yeah, and if you want to practice for an interview like itself, like without the whiteboard challenge, it's actually kind of a similar process. You're going to want to practice with friends and people that you know, and just kind of run through and have them ask you questions about your work. And it all comes back to defending your choices, basically. And yeah, and another thing is, if you just want to practice your design skills in general, or this is another way of also kind of doing a whiteboard challenge, is design-a-thons can be useful. Anything that requires you to do rapid prototyping in a group over like a 24-hour period, like the 7-day ones, like Adobe have design jams, whatever they're called, and some of them like 5-7 days, they're less useful in my, at least for interviews and things like that. It's more useful in general, just for like group work. But if you just want to just like practice and doing really rapid prototyping beyond even like sketches and wireframes, then like these 24-hour or even under 24-hour design-a-thons can be really useful.
If I might add, if you do anything where it's a design-a-thon that's like a weekend or less than 24 hours, don't expect to have like a perfect case study. It's more just to practice your design skills, I found from experience. But it is useful to go to them. They're just not my cup of tea per se.
Yeah, and I find that the longer, like you'll never, like if you think that you can go into them and expect to do kind of research, no. Don't expect you got to do any kind of real UX research for these. For the like 5 to 7 day or 2 week ones, yeah, that's probably more useful for people that are interested in user research. But yeah, it kind of depends on what you're interested in.
True. Another resource that's available to you guys as undergrads is, I believe, the Career Center lets you do practice interviews and resume checks. And I'm not sure if they do portfolios, but I know for a fact you can do practice interviews with them. So you should check that out. I think you sign up through Handshake.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good resource. And I believe that certain businesses, like Facebook, do this every year, will do portfolio reviews. Facebook generally hold a couple of these a year where their recruiters will review your portfolios. I think Adobe had one pretty recently. It's also often they will hold them later in the recruitment period as well. So it can be also be a good way of getting in with a recruiter if you don't apply at like the peak application period, or even after their applications are closed. I actually had that exact thing with Adobe, where they shut an application, but you go to an event and they let you apply anyway. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, just take advantage of everything that is offered to you at all times, and that's generally a good thing in general. But beyond that, as far as student organizations go, and I refrain from advertising a student organization, but Design Co. They tend to run resume reviews or resume workshops every so often, perhaps even once a quarter. And we may be running some in ACM starting in the fall. So there's some student org options as well. And I think even if you do isn't there like the coffee of an alumni still?
I think they have that. You have to sign up for Triton Connect, I think,
That's the one.
in order to do that. But yeah, if you want to reach out to your alumni, bases or alumni base, you can through trying to connect. So that way you can talk to fun people like me. But yeah, I hope that helps.
We're coming towards the end here, so I'm going to probably hard cut this off in 2 or 3 minutes. So if you have like a final question, or if anyone wants to just put anything in the chat that isn't directly a question, feel free. Otherwise, thank you for coming, for those that stayed through the whole thing. And we hope to run more of these in the future and dive into some more detailed and nuanced stuff. Perhaps for those of you that are interested in user research and human-computer interaction. Alrighty. I'm going to call it here. Again, thank you everybody for coming. And yeah, this was a test of running a design event here at ACM. Had a few little rocky patches, but I think overall it went okay. And yeah, I'd like to thank Natalie for helping me today and talking about a few other little things and giving some perspectives from her own knowledge base as an alumni. And yeah.
Thank you for having me, and it was nice talking to you guys.
Cool. So yeah, thank you everybody. You're free to leave. And yeah, have a good day.